want to talk about betrayal, common responses of betrayal. And this is an important thing to understand because how you try to cope with fear after betrayal can actually cause you more fear, can cause you more problems. And so if you can understand this and see yourself getting in this cycle, then you can catch it and you can learn how to take care of yourself and cope with the fear in a much healthier way. So what I want to do is break down what happens in the cycle, the fear cycle, and then talk to you about other options and things that you can do differently. So what happens is after betrayal has happened, you've experienced betrayal trauma, there's a lot of triggers. The triggers can be walking down the street, you can see certain things, or maybe your husband goes in the bathroom with his phone where he can hide it and who knows who he's talking to. Whatever the trigger is, it triggers you into fear. And that fear leads to obsession. You start to obsess about what's going on, what is he doing, am I good enough for him, will my future work out, what's going to happen in my life, and you start to obsess about what's happening. And as you obsess, it's building more and more fear. So it feeds more fear, you have more obsessive thoughts, and the cycle goes on and on. Eventually, it's going to lead you to behaviors. And those behaviors are going to be attempts to control your environment, your situation. And as you try to control his addiction, the more you try to control it, the more you're going to realize that you can't. And so it's going to lead you up to despair and shame and shut you down. And so as you try to cope with your fear through trying to control his addiction, you're going to cause yourself more and more fear. And the cycle goes on and on and on. And some common ways that I see wives try to control their husbands, I call it the 5 H's. And these are common responses to betrayal trauma. Now, I do want to say before I get into these common responses that feeling feelings of fear and sadness and anger and all of those things are important. They're an important part of the process of healing from betrayal. And so you need to allow yourself to feel those things. It's the behaviors, it's what you do with those feelings that will help you either process and heal and move forward, or they'll keep you stuck. And this is, I see women stay stuck in these 5 H's. So one is hopelessness, is to just go to this place of depression, shut down, hopelessness. Nothing's ever going to get better. Why should I even try? Why should I go to therapy? Why should I work my own recovery? Because it's just hopeless. I don't have any control over his addiction. He's always going to be acting out, so what's the point? And if you get stuck there, it's really hard to get out of that. Another one is hovering. Is, if you hover over everything he does in his recovery, you crack the whip and make him go to his 12-step groups. You watch the history on the computer and on the phones and to make sure that he's not acting out, and you work his recovery for him. What you're going to realize is as much as you try to work his recovery for him, you can't. It needs to come from within him. And as much as you try to control whether he acts out or not, you can't control it. He can act out around you. He can hide it. He can, no matter how much you try to hover over him, that won't keep you safe. Next is hating. And hating is just being very angry. And it's okay to be angry, but it's when you get stuck in that anger and you start to act out in it that it doesn't make you feel better. So as much as you want to hit him or throw things at him or yell at him or just give him dirty looks, it's not going to change his recovery or his addiction. Hugging is a common one, and that's going the opposite direction than hating. That is getting extra loving, extra kind, extra nice. It is not uncommon for disclosure to happen, discovery to happen of it all, and then a woman will have sex more often with her husband in the first couple weeks because she's trying to show him that she's enough And so she'll, lose weight or keep the house cleaner or have more sex just in an attempt to control his addiction, to show him, hey, I'm enough. You don't need anything else but me. And it's a futile attempt to control his addiction. Lastly is hiding, and that's pretending like what happened didn't happen. I've worked with women that for years just sat in secrecy and nobody knew about what was really going on in their life, because they didn't want to face it themselves and they didn't want to face it with other people. And I've run groups where women come to treatment for the very first time, and right when they sit down in that chair, they look at me, they have tears in their eyes because they're terrified to actually face the reality of what they're dealing with. And it's easier to put your head in the sand, pretend like everything's okay even when it's not, and that will not lead you to healing. That's just an attempt to control what your feelings of what you're actually going through, but it's not processing and really working through those things. So you look at this cycle here, the trigger, the fear, the obsession, the control. What's an alternative option to this? An alternative option to this is, instead of going around the cycle, when you recognize you're in fear, when you start to obsess, you get mindful of it, then you reach outside of going to your husband for safety, of connecting to him and saying, are you working your recovery? Are you doing everything okay? And you go and you do your own self-care outside of him. You check in on your boundaries. Are they set up? Are they in place? Are you safe with your boundaries? Do you have options to take care of yourself? Do you have a support system? Do you have things that you can go to because you need to surrender over controlling his addiction? And if you have that self-care in place, you can ultimately come to a place of surrender and acceptance, and know that even if he is acting out, that you're going to be okay, and that you can take care of yourself. And so I would challenge you to start to notice when you go into this fear cycle. If you do these 5 H's, don't beat yourself up. Everybody does this to a certain degree to try to cope with fear, but just notice when you do it. And if you find yourself doing any of these things, shift it to getting mindful of it and doing some very healthy self-care.